Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Ask Abhijit Show, episode 146. I hope you're all doing very well. Today I will take questions that you have asked in the comments with the hashtag Ask Abhijit. And at the end of the thing, if I have time, I will take some live chat questions as well. But before we do that, let me do my customary greeting. Let's see who all is there on the live chat with us. I can see Geopolitical Dubey, Prasad Londe, Akshay Kamath, Typical Gamer, Dhruv Verma, Akash, Nachiket, Shashwat, Deepak Kumar, Manoj, Gyan Kannadigas, Dev Dev Thakur, G. Sai Siddharth, Vishnu Kumar, Peshwa Bajirao, Feminist Slayer, Darshan Patel, Sai Kiran, Pinky Kumari, Ankit Kumar, Rita Singh, Aniket Biswas, Samudra Gupta, Vladimir Adityanath, Ankit Kishore, Sarthak, Saddam Hussein, como estas? Mr. Giga Chad of India, Karan Nalawat, Brijesh, Arsh, Shivam Singh, Arnav Agarwal, Ishan Singh, Sanat, Jitendra Kumar, Aaron, Dude, Munna, Samrat Shukla, Tushar Gupta, Asmodeus, Rohan Kadu, Durga, M, Aditya Bhatt, Melvin, K8991 Gaming, Ronald, System Tools, Librandu Detector, Democratic, Jay Dikshit, Sushant Gupta, Technish, Rahul, Rustin Cole, Madxai, Asminor, Minato, Namikaze, Ankit Kumar, Siddhant, Raj Kumar, Vladimir Adit Vladimirovich Putin, Dude Munna, Karthik, Raghunath, Aryan Samarth, Arpita, and lots of other people. Great to see you all on the live show. I could go on forever, but yeah, I think we should. I can say Tejas, Puru Kumar, Yashraj, Madaxai, and lots of other people. With that said, I will now start with the questions that you all have asked, and let me see how many I can take during the session. So, excuse me. All right. Okay, let's begin. So, what's question number one? Golden State 2002 says, could you talk about Buddha and his race? Many whites are saying that he is Scythian and blonde haired, blue eyed now. Well, how does he become blue eyed and blonde haired now? He was a historical person who lived about 2,500 years ago. That's the best estimate that we have. And so, what did he look like? So, Gautam Buddha, as we know, was born in northern India, Lumbini. It's now currently part of Nepal. Yeah, but historically, it's always been part of India. Yes, right. So he was born in northern India. He lived his life there. He preached. He gave his sermons all across northern India, eastern India, and he died in the city of Kushinagar. That's where he passed away. Right. And the Buddhist texts tell us a lot about what he looked like and all. There's a whole set of characteristics that are described, in which it is said that it looks like he had blue eyes. So that's not extremely surprising. There are lots of people in India who have blue eyes. It's a recessive characteristic, genetic characteristic, blue eyes. Yes, I remember a couple of months ago I was in a hotel whose manager had blue eyes, striking blue eyes, and he was Indian, a proper Indian. There are people in India. I mean, I would say most likely less than 1% of Indians would have blue eyes, and there are other eye colors also in India: green eyes and gray eyes and all those hazel eyes, whatever else. Yeah, blue eyes is quite rare, but yes, you do have people who have blue eyes in India, in northern India, in western India, in Gujarat, in Rajasthan, and Maharashtra as well. I am sure even in Kerala you will find people with blue eyes. Even in Sri Lanka you will find people with blue eyes, and so on. Yeah, so you do find people with blue eyes. That doesn't mean that these people are so-called white people, the so-called white race. And once again, you also find people in India who have blonde hair. You find people who have red hair also in India. It's quite rare, but you do find these characteristics also. India has incredible genetic diversity. So as far as we know, Gautam Buddha had blue eyes. I mean, some versions of his description, in some reports or some writings, it is in some accounts he is described as having blue eyes. So maybe he had blue eyes. There is no account that describes him as having blonde hair or hair that is not dark, right? And skin color, I'm not sure, maybe light brown or something must have been the skin color. That's typical of people who live in northern India. Yes. Now, about him being Scythian. So the Scythians, first of all, we have to understand, are an ancient people, nomadic people who lived across Eurasia, Europe and Asia. Hmm? And they were of Indian origin. They lived in the places that in the regions that were then called Uttarakuru and Uttaramadra. Uttarakuru was present day Xinjiang and Tibet, more or less present day. Yes, and Uttaramadra was present day Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, all of that, Central Asia, what is now called Central Asia. The Scythians lived there, and they were of Indian origin themselves. Of course, in European descriptions, they are described as having blue eyes and blonde hair. Well, Gautam Buddha is described as having Eastern Asian features when you see his statues in China and Mongolia and Japan, etc. In India, he's described as having Indian features because he was Indian, so on. So people will shape their perception of history based on what they look like. But the and the best genetic analysis that has been done of various Scythian remains tells us that they were of Indian origin, R1A1A, even the Kushans, yes, that's their patrilineal genetic lineage. And the Scythians, on average, the average Scythian had light brown skin, brown eyes, and dark hair. Yeah. And they were like reasonably tall. So that's what Scythians looked like. Now, the fact is that the Scythians did introgress into India. They did enter India. This their entry, their re-entry rather into India happened around 150 BC. Now Gautam Buddha lived around 500 BC, roughly, give or take. Yeah. So the Scythians reappear in India. I mean, they appear in India as invaders and conquerors about 350 years after Gautam Buddha died, roughly. Give or let's say 3 centuries after he died. So while he was alive, there were no Scythians in India, the Shakas. And yes, we know what he is called. One of the epithets used for him or terms used for him is Shakya Muni, the Shakya monk. So the word Shakya sounds very much like Saka or Shaka, which is the term that the Indians and Iranians the we used for the Scythians. The Indians called the Scythians the Shaka, and our Persian cousins called them the Saka, right? But that's not Shakya. That's different. So even I, many years ago, used to believe that the Gautam Buddha may have been Scythian because he's called Shakyamuni, but it's not Shakamuni or Sakamuni. He is Shakyamuni. So the Shakyas were a warrior clan in northern India, right? The Shakya dynasty, the clan, they were Kshatriyas, they were warriors, they were royalty. Yes. So that's why he was called Shakyamuni, because he was a Muni, he was a monk, he was not a warrior. He chose not to be a warrior. He chose to be a monk and all that. Whatever, we know the story. So that's why they called him Shakyamuni. He was not a Scythian monk. He was not of Scythian extraction, Scythian lineage. He was of Northern Indian lineage. So it's completely wrong to say that Gautam Buddha was a white person with blue eyes. Maybe he had blue eyes, but he certainly did not have white characteristics and features and blonde hair. Now, why has this question arisen? I'll show you why this question has arisen. Let me show you how Gautam Buddha is being described these days using artificial intelligence reconstructions. So this is a person, whoever it is, who says that I finally trained Mid Journey AI to draw a proper Buddha, and according to this lady, this is what a proper Buddha should look like. This individual looks like the Greco-Roman descriptions of various sports people, right? And she tries to justify what she's done by saying that most people have been extremely positive, but to the handful of fools complaining about Buddha depicted as white, 2 points. First, he is descended from Scythians, and in Pali he's described as being pale with blue eyes. And secondly, the Japanese depict Jesus as Japanese. So got a problem with that? So this is not any kind of justification. I mean, it's not her fault that the AI has thrown out this image. Maybe she's given certain prompts that made this depiction of apparently Buddha look like he is of Greco-Roman extraction. So in Pali, he's described as being pale with blue eyes. Well, in Pali, I would be described as being pale with brown eyes. That doesn't make me a white person. If I had blue eyes, that would not make me a white person. And secondly, the Japanese depict Jesus as Japanese. So I mean, what sort of argument is that? So the problem is that these days there's a lot of AI art coming out. Yeah, and the problem with AI art is that it's all biased. I mean, the see, what is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is a neural network. It's a set of programs and algorithms, yeah, that you have to train. You have to train these AIs with data, lots of data. In case it's an AI that outputs text, you have to train it with millions and millions of examples of text, and then slowly over time it's able to recognize how language is formed and so on and so forth. And then you have these AI chatbots these days that talk to you as if they're a real person, and they sound quite intelligent, and people are really enamored with this right now. Yeah, it's a fad that's going on right now. And of course we have all of these AI image generators that are throwing out all these images. And the problem is that the data that these AIs are trained on is all data that has been fed to them by their Western trainers. So when it comes to throwing out images of Indians, it's gonna be biased. It's gonna be more Eurocentric, right? And let me give you some other examples. Here's Indians are having fun with this AI image generators and all that. So here is a see whatever is being shown here. It's all generated by AI. It's not generated by the person who has tweeted this. So if you are upset about the images, please do not direct any hate towards the person who has tweeted this. Okay, they are just playing with the thing, and they're tweeting the kind of images they're getting. So this is apparently Prince Siddharth Gautam of Shakya clan once again. So so in the top left image, he is shown as having feathers in his hair, because I'm sure the AI was told to output an image of an Indian person. So for AIs that are trained in the West, Indian means Native American, right? So you see lots of these depictions of Indian historical figures having feathers in their headgear. And yeah, so this is a kind of stereotyped depiction of Siddhartha Gautam. These are apparently more realistic portraits of Prince Siddhartha Gautam, age 25, married, and so on. uh, Final attempt at Prince Siddharth Gautam. Yeah, blue eyes, sure, but yeah, these depictions look more Indian and somewhat more realistic, I would say. Yeah, and here's more. So now these are AI depictions of historical figures like Lord Rama. So this is Lord Rama according to AI. Lord Rama and Lord Lakshman, the two brothers. Yes, and can you see this strange cross, inverted cross or whatever it is on their foreheads? I mean, how is that an Indian cultural characteristic? Yeah. So these are the problems that you find, that you see, when you see AI generated images of Indian historical figures and culture. Here's another. This is Lord Jambavan wearing a very strange, almost the cape or dress that he is wearing reminds me of what Christian cardinals, Catholic cardinals would wear. And even the headgear, the crown, isn't Indian at all. Here is apparently Lord Lakshman, Lord Hanuman. Well, why does he have once again that face paint that is typical or stereotypical of Native Americans? Because the Native Americans are called Indians, right, in the US and in much of the Western world. Yeah. So once again, this is problematic. And this again, I'm not sure how to characterize this. This image again, and so on. Neela, chief of the Vanaras. This is something that you would see in a movie like The Planet of the Apes or something, yeah. And this is Angad. So I do not blame the Indians, the people who are playing with these AI image generators. The problem is that these AI generators, image generators, and text generators, etc., were trained on very biased data sets. Here, let's see some more examples. This is a very interesting Twitter account. Yeah. So this looks a little more historically and culturally accurate or appropriate. This is what a man of Gupta age would most likely or perhaps have looked like. Perhaps, yes. Certainly the physical feature, the facial features look definitely Indian. This is what the Hunnic invaders of India would have looked like. This, well, the Hunnic invaders of India would have looked more Eastern Asian, not the stereotypical Caucasoid look that you see here. So this is a fail from the AI. Yeah. This is what the Greco-Bactrian kings, the Indo-Greek kings would have looked like, possibly. But why do they have feathers in their hair? Once again, like the stereotypical Native Americans, this is again a problem. And the kind of the clothing he's wearing is more European than anything you would ever see ever in India, right? This is what the suckers would have looked like, Indo-Scythians, the invaders. Well, perhaps, perhaps not. We're not quite sure. This person looks like a present day person who lives in Central Asia, a mixture of Indian characteristics and Central Asian Turkic characteristics. So these AI image generators, and this is a lady from an Indian woman from the early British Raj. Definitely, Indian ladies from that time would wear such clothes, and the facial features are very much Indian. And this is a person from prehistoric Ireland. Sure, all right. So these are some examples, and this is the kind of fun that people have with AI. This is what AI is good at. Not It's still not good at historical reconstructions. It's good for playing these weird, funny games and all. You know, this is an example of OpenAI's Chat GPT. It is not willing to make the basic inference on who was responsible for the Bengal famine. Yeah, these language models are the next version of Wikipedia, encoding hard structural biases under the guise of neutrality. So the question that was asked to AI, OpenAI's Chat GPT, is who was responsible for the Great Bengal famine? And it says it was a combination of factors, including drought and war-related disruption, blah 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 blah. British colonial policies. It's not accurate to say that a single individual or group was solely responsible. And then it's questioned further, and yet it refuses to hold the British accountable. Further, then the very more specific question: was there a British politician or head of government who had the ability to change the British colonial policy, and so on? So it goes around and round around Winston Churchill, but does not hold Winston Churchill responsible. So that's the kind of bias. Everyone knows that Winston Churchill is the monster who killed more than 4 million Bengalis deliberately. It was an artificially engineered famine. It was done at the behest of Winston Churchill, that monster who is responsible for the genocide of more than 4 million Indians, Bengalis, right? Indians, of course. And yet, this thing is unwilling to tell you about that. It's unwilling to recognize what really happened. So that's bias. That is clear bias. Now, on my channel, I think more than a year ago, I spoke about algorithm bias, right? So let's search for it. Algorithm bias. In case, see, I've got more than 1,000 videos on my channel, and many of the questions I've already answered. So this is how you can search for something that you may want to look for. So here is a video more than a year ago from episode 27 of Ask Abhijit. Yeah, algorithm bias. How can AI be manipulated? So in case you want to understand how AIs can be manipulated and how they can be biased, take a look. Watch this video. It's less than 5 minutes long. Yeah, in which I've spoken about how this is done. So that's the deal. So the truth about Gautam Buddha and his race is that he was Indian. The problem is the Indian education system. In any other country, if such a question would be asked about one of their historical figures, the questioner would be laughed at. Yeah, I mean, if somebody would claim that like in our case, it is being said that Gautam Buddha was white. Let's say somebody makes the claim that Julius Caesar was black. Every single Italian person, man, woman, and little child would laugh at that person. But in the case of India, Indians are wondering because somebody made Gautam Buddha look white. So what was the race? We don't even know the truth about our history. It is the fault squarely that it is squarely the fault of the Indian education system and our history teachers and our history textbooks. They are to blame for this. This is something that should be laughed at. This is laughable. It's risible. It's asinine that somebody has portrayed Lord Buddha, Gautam Buddha, as a white person. It's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. And yet, when someone does it, we get confused. We Indians start questioning ourselves that was it true? Was he white? What nonsense! It is the fault of the Indian education system that people have this question and people are so confused and full of self doubt. So I hope I have thrown some light on what this entire thing is about. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Aditya Srivastav says, what's your opinion on AI art? Is it ethical? I've heard many artists claim that about art theft and cyberbullying. How will art be affected in the future? Yeah, AI art is a problem. So these AIs, they are trained to output art by feeding them millions of images. images of art, images of classical painters like Picasso and not Mozart, sorry, Picasso and whoever else, Vincent van Gogh, and lots of other painters, painters from mainly from Europe, but also art from other parts of the world, I suppose, which would be in a small minority in the overall context. Yep. And even lots of modern art is being fed into these AI, for in order to train the AIs. So art that is scraped off the internet. Yeah. Let's say you go to, let's say you do a Google search. Let's do it, shall we? Let's do a Google search, and let's just do modern paintings, or modern art. Uh, and we go here, and lots of these images that you'll find on Google image search will be images that are created by modern artists. Yes, 21st century artists. And it's so easy to scrape these images of Google image search and feed them into AIs. And then the AIs, what they do, and is that they then are able to reproduce the same style as that of modern artists. So if you tell the AI, paint an image of a dog playing snooker in the style of so and so artist who may be alive today, may be a young artist, then the AI will produce art that looks exactly like what this specific individual would paint. So that is incredibly problematic. So it would, so now that AI has become so good at producing art, it there's the real possibility that it's going to put lots of artists out of business. And it's yeah, it could constitute in some ways art theft, because you're producing the exact same style as so and so person. Let's say I'm an artist. Every artist has their own style of painting or whatever it is. Then the AI could be, if you let's say I'm a painter, a digital painter, modern painter. Yeah, I create digital art, and I have, let's say, 50 works of art that are available online, but they belong to me. The copyright belongs to me. So the AI can be fed that data as input, and then it will be able to start outputting anything in my style, which essentially puts me out of business forever. Yeah. So that is very problematic. So yes, many AI, many artists have pointed this out, that this is extremely unethical, and we will. I mean, we will need to formulate some kind of copyright guidelines or something like that, which prevents this from happening. Because right now it's a free for all. There are no laws, there are no rules, nothing, and you can just scrape millions of images of the internet and feed it into your AI, and then the AI will do can essentially put artists out of business. Now AI is able to produce incredible art, all kinds of art, anything that you can, anything that you can imagine. It's able to produce it. It can produce lots of different versions and iterations of whatever you can imagine. So yeah, it could actually uh, put painters out of business, and that's bad. So right now there are no solutions, but somebody needs to find a solution. People need to get together, think about this properly, and formulate the right solutions for this. Okay. Angel Dust says, seriously, is there any society where there is no discrimination? Wake up, it's human nature. Disappointed in you. So this person is disappointed in me, and I think the context is the fact that I pointed out about the incidents, the very high incidence of discrimination and racism in Israel. Yeah. So in response to that, this person say, listen, first of all, no hate to anybody. People have their own perspective and all that, so we got to respect that. So the what this person is saying is indeed true. There is absolutely no society in the entire multiverse where there is no discrimination. There is no society. See, people believe that there should be equality in the world. That is absolute nonsense. Equality is unnatural. There can be no equality in the world. There can be equality of opportunity, but there can never be equality of outcome, which would be extremely counterproductive. If you try to achieve equality of outcome, if you try to engineer an equality of outcome. Why do I say there is that equality is unnatural? Have you seen two human beings who are exactly the same, who are exactly equal in everything? Some people are tall, some are short, some are muscular, some are skinny, some are intelligent, some are less intelligent, some are athletic, some are very unathletic, and so on and so forth. Everybody has certain set of skills and talents, and some things that they are deficient in, right? That's just how it is. Everybody is unequal. Nobody is equal. You cannot equate two people. Everyone's unique. Look at animals. You think can you equate a rabbit with a boa constrictor, with a crocodile, with a lion, with a parrot, with a tortoise, with an ostrich? Doesn't work like that. Everybody is different. Every species is different within a species. If you look at tigers, if you take 7 8 different tigers, they will all be different. They will all have different characteristics. And what are sporting competitions all about? We are witnessing the World Cup, football World Cup right now. What is it about? Is it a celebration of equality? No, it's a celebration of inequality. Now, discrimination and inequality are a whole different thing. Now, obviously, in every society you will have discrimination, and this person is definitely upset about the fact that I pointed out that there is so much discrimination in Israeli society. And the implication seems to be perhaps that first introspect and look at Indian society. Well, let me tell you, the problem once again boils down to the education system. We are taught so many lies about India, about our own history. All your history textbooks, just look at who wrote them. Who are the individuals who wrote your history textbooks? And what were their political inclinations like? What were their agendas like? It's quite transparent. The entire Indian education system has been under the stranglehold of essentially anti-Indian forces since the 1960s and 70s, essentially since British times, right? Essentially since British times. They have all been biased against India. They have had this agenda to portray India as regressive, as misogynistic, as all those bad things they could think about, as a backward society, as a primitive, barbaric society, and so on and so forth. Yes, inequality, discrimination, casteism, all that nonsense. Yes, that's how every single textbook will teach you, and that's why you are filled with these ideas. And when I come and tell you that it's not the case, you tell me that you are stupid. I am stupid. Disappointed in you, Abhijit, because you're telling us something our textbooks don't tell us. Well, the problem is you have not studied enough history. Look at how Indian history has been depicted over the centuries. Look at how the Greeks wrote about India 2,500 years ago. Look at how the Chinese wrote about India. The Chinese word for India was Tianshu, the center of heaven. Yeah. Why would they call another nation the center of heaven? Give it a status above their own? Why? Why did everybody flock to India to get knowledge? Why did the Japanese write so well about India? Why did the Chinese write so well about India? The Chinese have always had this culture of superiority, and yet they called India Tianju, the center of heaven. The Greeks wrote so well about India. The Persians wrote so well about India. Even the Europeans, when they first came to India about 500 or so years ago, wrote about India in such incredibly glowing terms. That the Indian family system is the best family system in the world, far better than anything European society has. It's only once the missionaries started coming into India, that's when the portrayal changed. It was a complete 180-degree turn. And that's when they started suddenly creating this atrocity literature. You haven't studied sufficient history. That's why you're not able to see this chronology. Yes, and lots of Indian scholars have written about this. Look at the works of Meenakshi Jain, Dr. Meenakshi Jain, who has been on this channel at least once, at least. Yeah. So I would suggest, please study history properly. You have I see. Listen, I am not trying to say that I know all of history. No, I'm still learning history. I'm still learning history. I'm still a student. I'm still figuring things out. But it is possible that I may have studied a little more history than the person who's asking this question. Possibly, perhaps he or she knows more than me. In which case, they can give actual evidence. But the truth is that India, if you compare all the civilizations in the world, India has been the fairest of them all, with the least possible discrimination. Yes. And now, if you want to talk about discrimination, the this comment came in one of the videos in which I spoke about Israel. Right? You know what the truth is? The truth is that there is more discrimination against Jews in Israel today than there has ever been in India in the past 2,500 years. Jews first came into India maybe 2,000 years ago or slightly before that, and they have lived in India, Jews, for more than 2,000 years. There has never ever been anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic discrimination in India ever. And in Israel today, I can give you 1,000 examples of discrimination against Jews. Since we are talking about this, why don't I do it? Why don't I show it? Yeah, so I've spoken about this before. Let me give you some more examples. This is Indian Jews in Israel. It wasn't the promised land. So if you read this article, you can see the link, the URL. You can Google it. Yes, Indian Jews in Israel. It wasn't the promised land. There is a lot of discrimination in Israel against Indian origin Jews. They are Jews. They are your brothers, sisters, and yet you discriminate against them. Why? Why? Isn't Israel the promised land for all Jews? If it is so, then why is there discrimination against Indian origin Jews? Here is another: the murder of a young Bnai Menashe immigrant. This is a northeast Indian Jew, yes, from Churachandpur district of Manipur. So these people, they believe they are Jewish, and they have been allowed by the Israelis to come and migrate to Israel. And then, good God, the kind of discrimination and racism they are facing. These Jews, these Indian origin Jews. Here is one more. India's Jewish lost tribe faces hard times in Israel. Read this article, right? Here is more. Uh, B'nai Menashe break silence to protest subjugation to NGO controlling their aliyah. Terrible, yes? Intimidation to silence detractors, and so on. Assessing the racism that exists towards the Bnai Menashe community. These are Indian origin Jews. Terrible, terrible discrimination. They are called China, and they're ridiculed, and they're assaulted, and they're beaten up, and they're murdered. Yes, in Israel. It's not only the Indian origin Jews. In Israel, some Jews are more equal than others. Ethiopian Jews have suffered discrimination by the Israeli state, which has been intelligent enough to divide ethnic groups to ensure there will never be a joint fight against them. So this is being done at the state level, not at the people to people level. This is institutionalized discrimination and racism in Israel, right? Against their own people, against their own Jewish people. Israel gave birth control to Ethiopian Jews without their consent. Birth controlled, sterilized. Israel has admitted for the first time it has been giving Ethiopian Jewish immigrants birth control injections, often without their knowledge or consent. Yes, uh, and so on. So when did this stop? I wonder. The government had previously denied the practice, but the Israeli Health Ministry's Director General has now ordered gynecologists to stop administering the drugs. Which year was this? 2013. So in 2013, they officially asked the gynecologists to stop administering the drugs without the knowledge or consent of the victims. So until 2013, at least this was going on as a state policy. Yeah, because Ethiopian origin Jews are dark skinned. They're not white, right? So it's fine. They should not reproduce. They should not be able to reproduce. There's more. Little hope of change for Israel's marginalized groups. Once again, Ethiopian Israeli protesters are arrested in Jerusalem. So you can read this. Ethiopian Jews confront racism in Israel, Middle East Policy Council. Uh, how the Israeli army's racist system harmed hundreds of thousands of Mizrahim. The Mizrahi Jews are the brown-skinned Jews, not the real Jews, the original Jews, and they are about 45% of Israel's population. And 45% of your population, you are racist against them. Can you believe the incredible what's going on in Israel? Yes. So you can read the article about how the Israeli army's racist system. It's a systemic thing. It harmed hundreds of thousands of Mizrahi Jews. Yes, the legacy of racism towards Mizrahi Jews, the brown-skinned original Jews. Yeah, terrible, terrible. There are riots. Israel state rabbi spread racism in the name of Judaism, the rejection of Ethiopian Israelis' Jewish identities. People tell me that the Israelis have been so good, they went to Africa and they rescued the Ethiopian origin Jews, the black skinned Jews. And that's wonderful. They have made movies about that. And then see what happens when they reach Israel. Horrible. State rabbi spreads racism in the name of Judaism. We saw Jews with hearts like Germans. Moroccan immigrants in Israel warned from families not to follow. So there were Jews in Morocco as well. There may still be, perhaps. So they migrated to Israel, and then, based on the kind of treatment that was meted out to them, they warned their families not to follow, not to come to Israel. Stay in Morocco, even though it's a Muslim majority place. It is better for you to stay in Morocco than to come to Israel. Just imagine that. So these are a few examples. A few examples. I can do a 3-hour session and show you hundreds of examples. That is how incredibly racist and discriminatory Israeli society is. And the Israeli state itself is against its own people, not against the Palestinians, not against people of a non-Abrahamic religion, against their own Jewish people. So am I wrong to point this out? Yeah. It is true that every society has some level of discrimination, but overall, if you look at Indian society, it has been the least discriminatory society, the fairest society of all, a society in which everybody could prosper for thousands of years. What happened in the past 1000 years is that India was again under foreign occupation. India society was mangled and distorted. It was driven to despair. And when a society cannot function the way it has evolved to function, all kinds of uh, you know distortions and evil practices, bad practices will creep into the society from outside. Yes. But I have spoken about this multiple times, so I'm not going to go on about this. But the truth is that India society has always been the least discriminatory society in the entire world. Right now, India society is coming out of 1,000 years of destruction, of wholesale destruction, the worst genocide human history has ever seen. So it will take time for society to readjust itself. Even right now, we are under colonial laws. Yes, Hindu phobic laws, uh, laws that seek, and governance system and institutions that seek to eradicate Indian culture from India. Yeah. So that's what India is up against. So let's not blame the victims. Let's blame the actual oppressors who have distorted and destroyed Indian society and made it what it is. Yeah, India society, like I've said, it suffers from two things. It suffers from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it also suffers from amnesia. So it doesn't. People don't know why the society has been distorted like this. So they tend to blame themselves. So it's so easy to make Indians feel ashamed of themselves, that your society is this and that and all that. And that's what they've been doing. And that's why they ensure that the education system teaches you lies, your teachers teach you lies, your textbooks teach you lies, your government teaches you lies, your leaders teach you lies, tell you lies. They glorify the wrong people. Yeah. And the result is a society that is totally brainwashed, totally mentally colonized, and a society that is ashamed of their own culture. So please, educate yourselves. Educate yourselves about what the truth is. Right, let's move on from here. Okay, Razi Toshif says, recently the West has tagged a price cap on Russian crude oil by at $60 a barrel. They said if any country doesn't follow this, they will not be allowed to use tankers of EU, NATO, and Australia. Now, India and China are the big clients of Russian crude oil, and this will affect us. Should India and China not cooperate with each other on this issue, and should not all the Asian countries cooperate together, work together to overcome the dollar dominance, like India, Iran, China, Russia, C nations, that is Southeast Asian nations, perhaps Central Asian nations combined, we are about 60% of the world's global population. If we do so, even the West cannot sanction us. That will make them exclusive. Yeah. So the West is trying to impose these arbitrary oil price caps and all that. Who the hell are they to decide at what price somebody should sell and buy oil? Yeah, but they are trying to do that. This is called arm twisting. This is called blackmail. So what's happening right now is possibly a move towards de-dollarization. Right now, the US, the basis of the US hegemony over the world is the fact is the US dollar's reserve currency status. It is the world's reserve currency, the petrodollar. So if the world, or some section or some portion of the world, let's say 50% of the world, were to move away from the dollar, then that would be a severe setback to the Anglo-Saxon hegemony on the world. And that's what various nations seem to be moving towards, the BRICS plus grouping. Right now it's just BRICS, but many nations have expressed their desire to join the BRICS grouping. And if that happens, and if the BRICS grouping comes up with its own reserve currency that is not tied to debt, that is not based on false promises and just debt, but it is actually based on gold and a basket of commodities, gold and oil, and graphite and uranium and whatever else, yeah, various metals and so on, then that currency will actually have some real value. And if a significant section of the world adopts that, then it'll be a significant challenge to the old Anglo-Saxon hegemonic world order. Yes, but yeah, it is very hard for nations like India and China to come together, to come to an agreement and cooperate. When you see the nature of the Chinese empire, the Chinese are an empire. It's an imperial power. Yes, it's an imperial power with hegemonic ambitions of its own. That's what China is, and uh, they also seek Indian territory. They lay claims on more Indian territory, and there is this history since the 1950s of confrontation between India and China. We know the history, so it's very hard for these two nations to trust each other, and yet they will have to, if they want to make this happen, they're going to have to find a way. So maybe the Russians can mediate between India and China or whatever, but India and China essentially cannot cooperate until the border issue is settled. And the Chinese have shown no signs of doing that. They have been holding that as a Damocles sword on over the head of India and so on. So yeah, big challenges. But if a bunch of nations come together, and the other thing is that if the BRICS grouping actually takes off and becomes larger, then there is always the danger that the Chinese will try to dominate the thing, the entire coalition, the entire grouping, and use it for their own benefit. Yeah, use it to further their own hegemonic, expansionist, imperialist agenda. Typically, in a coalition of nations, in a grouping of nations, the most powerful nation essentially hijacks or takes over the whole grouping and uses the grouping to further its own geopolitical interests. So that is always a danger when you have a grouping that includes China. So for that to be offset, we would need India and Russia to cooperate together and counterbalance China, maybe even Iran. But the Iranians don't really see China as a threat because they don't have a common border with China. So the Iranians may not be so inclined to working with Russia and India to counterbalance China. The two nations that have large borders with China currently are Russia and India. So these two nations see China as a threat, whether they say it or not. So there's this entire thing happening right now. But yes, I would say that the Asian nations should cooperate and find and create a new system, a parallel system, a system that will compete with the petrodollar system. Even the Saudis want to join BRICS. That would be a major blow to the petrodollar if they actually come in, become a part of BRICS. Yeah. And right now, very recently, President Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia. He held a China Arab Nations Summit. He met the various leaders there, including the King Salman and Mohammed bin Salman and so on. So yeah, so China is kind of taking the initiative, and they are doing it obviously for their own interests. So there are so many different angles and different parameters that you have to take into account when all of this when you analyze all this. So it would be great if all these different nations come together, but that typically happens when there is one major dominant power that makes them come together. Right now, China is not that dominant. Yes, it is definitely the number two economy in the world, but nobody trusts China, and everyone is scared of China. Especially it's the nations which have which have boundaries with China, and China has boundary disputes with almost all its neighbors. So yeah, that's a tough situation that we are all in. If China were not that hegemonic imperialistic and expansionist power, then it would make things so much easier. But that's the way they are. So we're going to have to see what happens, whether the leaders of these nations are able to find a way. Ideally, but see, right now India is not that large in economy. uh, It is the fifth largest economy in the world or so. Maybe in the next 5 years, it will become the third largest economy. Yeah, it will overtake Germany and Japan. It's a matter of time. It's only when India rises to a certain level, to at least I would say $10 trillion economy. Yeah, that's when India would become a major force in its own right and be able to possibly counterbalance China on its own without Russian help, possibly. So the way forward for India right now is to rise economically, because with economic rise, with economic muscle comes military muscle proportionally, and so on. So yeah, that's the situation. It would be great if all the nations come together, but it is right now difficult because people don't trust China. Nobody trusts China, but they do seek the economic benefits that China can provide. So that's the kind of catch 22 we are in. The nations that don't have borders with China are more open to collaborating and cooperating, but for us, like nations like India and Russia, it is, we have to be much more careful. That's where we are, and that's the situation that the US can take benefit of, to keep these nations fighting, to ratchet up the threat perceptions and so on. So there are so many games that are being played right now. There's the whole Ukraine angle as well. That's where we are. Tejas says, what qualified Zelensky for becoming Time Magazine's Man of the Year 2022? And Daniel says, what has President Volodymyr Zelensky achieved to be named Time Magazine's Person of the Year? Russia is fighting it out, conquering Ukrainian territory, while this man is only doing lip service. How is he helping Ukrainian civilians in doing this? See, when it comes to, okay, let's see Time Magazine's tweet. What did they say about Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky? Let's put that on the screen. Yes. Uh, Time Magazine's announcement. So this is what they said. Times 2022 Person of the Year. It's no longer Man of the Year, it's Person of the Year, which is fine. Volodymyr Zelensky in the spirit of Ukraine. So they have announced that he is the Person of the Year, and that's what it is. The question is, what has he done to deserve this? See, when it comes to receiving a Western award, what qualifies you for receiving a Western award is what service have you provided to the West. That is what qualifies you to receive a Western award, whether it is the Time Person of the Year or the Pulitzer Prize or the Booker Prize or whatever, the Nobel Peace Prize or whatever else it is. What if you win this prize? It means that you have offered significant services to the West that have, and that's the reward you get. So Volodymyr Zelensky hasn't served the people of Ukraine, he has served the West. And sometimes a meme tells you the meme is more important. I mean, it is more it communicates more than you could communicate with words. So take a look at this meme. So that's the service Mr. Zelensky has provided. If you remember Afghanistan, the US occupied Afghanistan for the best part of 2 decades, if not more. Afghanistan, the US occupation of Afghanistan was a massive money laundering operation, and obviously it served to benefit the military industrial complex of the US. And a similar kind of thing is happening in Ukraine. Possibly a lot of money laundering, maybe some other stuff as well. So Volodymyr Zelensky is offering a significant service to the West. They wish to break up Russia eventually, partition Russia, fragment Russia, destroy Russia as a nation, as a culture. So Zelensky can help them do that, by embroiling the Russians in this war. And if you can drag the war for the next 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years, then it can hopefully bleed Russia, the Russian economy in the nation, and hopefully destroy it. So Zelensky is helping the West further their agenda of destroying Russia, because they see Russia as a major threat. The Chinese, possibly they think that we can handle the Chinese, but Russia is a much bigger threat apparently, right? And in the past they have done similar things as well. Yeah, this is Time Magazine's Man of the Year 1931. It was Mr. Mohandas Gandhi. I mean, what service did he render to India? I wonder. He delayed India's independence for more than 20 years. Yes, but that's precisely the service he rendered to the West, Mr. Gandhi. So this is not the first time a leader of this quality has been given an award for services rendered to the West. The West are past masters at doing this. They create a fake leader, prop that person up, elevate that person to legendary status, and then give these fake awards to make the gullible citizens of that nation feel that yes, this person is really indeed truly great. That's what the West has done again and again and again, and they are still in the process of doing such things, including possibly in places like India, propping up various leaders, creating new leaders out of thin air. I'm not taking any names, so please don't accuse me of I am saying this or that. I am saying nothing. They are doing this in lots of countries, propping up various politicians and portraying them as great revolutionary leaders. It's happening in lots of places. This is what they do. It is standard. It is the standard operating procedure, modus operandi, right? So Mr. Zelensky essentially has done nothing really to deserve this. What he has done is he has rendered this massive service to the West. He is on call 24/7. Anytime he's needed to make a statement, he will come and make a statement. I think he makes video statements every day, if I'm not mistaken. And he will typically have lots of green screens around him and 15 different camera angles, and he will say, wearing the same the military dress every day, and say whatever script is handed out to him. So that's the kind of service Mr. Zelensky is. He's an actor. He's good at this. He's really good at this. So that's a service he's offering, and for that, in recognition of this service, to reward him for his service, he has been given this award, Times Person of the Year. And there was this Vogue photo shoot also, right, in which he and his wife posed for the cover of Vogue magazine and all that. So yeah, that's what it is. The ultimate warrior says, how can such a constrained economy be able to invent such things? I suspect he's referring to North Korea. Yes, this technology, and obviously the technology he's referring to is nuclear technology and ballistic missile technology, ICBM technology, intercontinental ballistic missile. The North Koreans have a whole family now of ballistic missiles. The Nodong, the Rodong, the Hwasong. The Hwasong 17 is the latest massive missile. It's an intercontinental ballistic missile that they have tested recently. They've also conducted 6 or 7 nuclear tests, yes, at various points in time. So the question is that how can such a constrained economy invent such things? This technology is definitely being provided by China, and it could be a threat to India as well. North Korea is a China-funded puppet country whose existence is to be used to go on to war with major superpowers and sacrifice itself if needed to take the blame away from China. That's what essentially the definition of a vassal state. It's a state that is used as a proxy. It is a state that is used for a variety of purposes. Let's say you are a very major power. Let's say you are a superpower, and you want to do certain things, but you don't want to be seen to do those things. Then you create a puppet state, or a whole bunch of puppet states, and you have them play various roles and provide various services. Yes, and if they do it well, and as long as they're useful for you, you let them prosper. Look at what Japan was really prospering until the 1980s, until suddenly somebody pulled the plug on Japan, right? So Japan is a vassal state of the US. It is under permanent military occupation of the US. South Korea, the same. And when it comes to the Chinese, North Korea is China's vassal state. So this family, this dynasty, the Kim dynasty, Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Il, and Kim Jong Un. Now, these 3 leaders, they belong to the same family: grandfather, father, and son. Yes, and they essentially they are propped up by China, obviously, and I'm sure the Chinese have provided them various kinds of technologies. Yes, including ballistic missile technology, which was then passed on to Pakistan via North Korea. And possibly even the Pakistan nuclear program, not possibly, definitely, some of it was stolen from the West, and the West knew it. They allowed it to happen because they wanted to counterbalance India. And then some of it was provided by the Chinese as well. So the Chinese, I spoke about this yesterday. They told the Americans that in I think 2012 or so, when they were in control of Pakistan, when they were Pakistan's big daddy, they said to the Americans that Pakistan is our Israel. We are using Pakistan the way you use Israel. So Israel is another American vassal state in the Middle East, and they use it in a variety of ways, which we'll not go into right now. So North Korea, the Chinese will prop up the regime, the North Korean regime, the Kim Jong-un regime, as long as North Korea is useful. And it's going to be useful indefinitely. As long as the Americans are in control of Japan and South Korea, and as long as that situation exists, North Korea is very valuable for the Chinese as an attack dog, as a destabilizing factor, as a nation to use in case of war, to maybe launch missiles at Japan and South Korea and all that. So the Chinese can be seen as having stayed away from all this. Their hands are clean. The North Koreans are doing this. So it gives you plausible deniability, even though everyone knows who the real master is. And someday it can be sacrificed to take the blame away from China, like Ultimate Warrior is saying here. So yes, this is a vassal state, and not all vassal states are used for military purposes. Japan developed so many wonderful technologies, which the Americans, whatever was useful for them, they have taken. Yes, right now Taiwan is a vassal state. TSMC is being stolen by the Americans now. Yeah, the semiconductor corporation. It is now the heart, the core of TSMC is now being relocated to the US, which means in a few years, Taiwan will be expendable, maybe in 3 years, maybe in 5 years. And let's see how things go by then. Maybe by 2025, perhaps, who knows? The Americans are doing this very rapidly. There's already one large plant, or TSMC plant in Arizona, and the second one, and a second world one is already being built, and so on. So that's how you. So Taiwan has never been used as a military base. Obviously, it is militarized the way Japan is, but Taiwan was used for that purpose, and so on. So vassal states are states that are essentially victims. They are being parasitized on by a more powerful state, and it is being used in a variety of ways. The population may be very prosperous, which is great, so it will keep them quiet. Yes, but the political class is controlled by the foreign power. The military is controlled by the foreign power. This nation has no actual foreign policy, and when the time comes, the hammer will fall and the nation will be destroyed. It eventually will happen. That's the characteristics. These are the characteristics of a vassal state. So that's what North Korea is for China. That's what Pakistan was for about a decade or so for China. Now Pakistan is the US's vassal state once again. So that's how the game is played. Daniel Nicholson says, is Bhutan India's de facto vassal state? If not, how and why did India go on to become the security guarantor of Bhutan? Could PRC, People's Republic of China, choose Bhutan to be its battle theater in a short war with India? A vassal state, like I said, is a state that is used against its will to play various kinds of roles and serve various kinds of purposes for the superior power. Now, is India using Bhutan in this manner? Making Bhutan play a certain role against its wishes? India is not doing that. Bhutan, from India's perspective, is a small buffer state against China. India wants Bhutan to remain independent and peaceful and be out of the influence of China. That's all. Apart from that, India is not utilizing Bhutan or in any of the ways that the Americans, for instance, use Japan or South Korea or Israel or Pakistan, and any of the ways that the Chinese use North Korea. India is not doing to Bhutan what the Americans have been doing to the NATO states or the EU. Yeah, EU's economy is right now being crushed. The European Union, yeah, it's being crushed. The economy, and so on. So India has not done any of that to Bhutan. India needs to be the security guarantor of Bhutan, because otherwise the Chinese will overrun Bhutan and we will have a new threat where Bhutan once used to be. And do the Bhutanese want the Chinese to do that? No, obviously not. The Chinese are already nibbling away at parts of northern Bhutan. Yeah, they're already doing that. The Chinese are encroaching on Nepalese territory. They're encroaching on Bhutanese territory. They are encroaching on everyone's territory. Everyone's scared of China. And India has never been a hegemonic power. That's why Bhutan obviously will rely on India rather than China as a security guarantor. Whom do you need security guarantees from? From China or from India? From Bhutan's perspective, they need security guarantees from India to safeguard them from China. Right, so that's what it is. So in the future, could the Chinese choose Bhutan as a battle theater in a short war with India? Well, it's very hard to use Bhutan as a battle theater because the Bhutanese territory is extremely mountainous. It's very hard to do warfare over there. Let's take a look at this, right? Map. We need to have the map at least once or twice in every live stream. So here's the map. Let's go into Bhutan. So if you see the satellite image of Bhutan, you will see that it's incredibly mountainous and full of forests. It's very hard to do any kind of warfare here except for hand to hand fighting or very close combat, close range fighting. Yes, you can't drive tanks or any armored vehicles here. Yeah, the peaks are very high. These are the Himalayas, so even helicopter warfare or whatever will be difficult, and so on. So it's very, if you want to, if the Chinese want to use another nation to maybe make a foray into India, they could possibly, in some locations, possibly use Nepalese territory. But Bhutan is very hard because it's so mountainous, yeah, and forested. But yeah, the Chinese could definitely in the future, at some point in time, if they feel very confident, try to invade Bhutan and take over parts of Bhutanese territory more than what they're already doing. It's certainly a possibility. So India needs to ensure that Bhutan's territorial integrity is not compromised, and that's the guarantee that India essentially, whether it is written or not, India has given Bhutan. Yeah. So Bhutan is India's protectorate from that perspective. Okay, Vishwa says we need a fighter jet for INS Vikranth, the Indian aircraft carrier, the new one. We have two in service right now. One is INS Vikramaditya, which was originally uh, called Baku, then it was called Admiral Gorshkov, and then it was called INS Vikramaditya once we acquired it from the Russians, which is a whole long, lengthy story, which I spoke about yesterday to a certain extent. Yes. So we have this new aircraft carrier, which we have built ourselves, developed, designed, and created, built ourselves indigenously. And right now, the this aircraft carrier, the new one, the INS Vikrant, is undergoing sea trials. Yes, the sea trials will continue until 2023 or something like that. And obviously, we need a contingent of jets, fighter planes, for the INS Vikrant. Let's see what INS Vikrant looks like, shall we? INS Vikrant. INS Vikrant. Let's put that on the screen. INS Vikrant. Here we are. Here we are. This is the aircraft carrier which we have built ourselves. Right now, as you can see, it has no fighter planes on its deck. So yeah, some helicopter trials are happening, and there were some other fighter jet trials, possibly also that may have happened or maybe in the process of happening. But thus far, this warship has not acquired, has not been given its contingent of fighter planes. So this warship, INS Vikrant, this aircraft carrier, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it can carry about 30 or so, roughly, fighter planes. 30 or so fighter planes. So what kind of fighter plane would it carry? I mean, every aircraft carrier has a certain set of characteristics. So if it's a very large one, it can have maybe 70, 80, like the American aircraft carriers have. Yeah, maybe up to 100. So it could have a bunch or a mix of different kinds of fighter planes. The Americans typically have the FA-18 Hornet and some other planes as well, maybe AWACS planes, maybe a few helicopters, and so on and so forth. In the case of the Indian aircraft carrier, it will carry about 30 fighter planes. And the question is, which fighter plane will we acquire? So if you look at this aircraft carrier, it has a set of elevators, I think two elevators, which have a certain width. So and below the deck, you will have the hangars where the planes will be refitted and refueled and all those things. Essentially refitted, maintained and all. So the maintenance will happen below the deck, and then the plane will have to be brought up on the top deck using the elevator. And the elevator has a certain width, which means that we cannot have a plane which is wider than that on the INS Vikrant. And that kind of tells us that certain planes are out of the question. Like the F-35, I believe, is clearly out of the question, but anyway, we are not acquiring that. So there was supposed to be a naval version of the LCA Tejas, and the Navy said it's too heavy for our purpose, so they've rejected that. Right now, we have a twin engine deck based fighter, TEDBF, that is being developed by HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. That will, I think the first trials will happen by 25 to 25, 26, 27, somewhere there, and it will be inducted finally by 2032 or so. The twin engine deck based fighter, the Indian fighter plane. Until then, we need to have some kind of stopgap solution. One possibility is the MiG-29, which is already used in the other aircraft carrier. It's a good plane, but it's kind of old. It's kind of not a new, not the cutting edge technology. It's a good plane, the MiG-29. That's one possibility. The other possibility is the Rafale, not the Rafael, but the Rafale, RAFALE, Rafale. That's the French fighter plane of which we have acquired 36 or so. which it's a multi-role fighter plane, and it does very well from aircraft carriers. So that's one possibility. And the other possibility is the American FA-18 Super Hornet. Now, which one should we go for? Maybe not the MiG-29, it's an older design. We want something more modern. Even the FA-18 is an older design. It's from the 1970s or 80s or something like that. You look at the history. The Rafale is a very modern fighter plane. It's an excellent fighter plane. Yeah. So the it seems to boil down to two fighter planes: the FA-18, the Super Hornet, which is an American fighter plane, and the French Rafale. So which one should we take? That's the question, isn't it? Which one should we acquire? So we would typically want to acquire about 35, 36 aircraft fighter planes. The Vikranth will be able to carry 30, but let's have a few more. So maybe 30, 40. So we acquired 36 Rafale, so maybe another 36 new fighter planes, maybe Rafale, maybe FA-18. Now, which one should we go for? Should we go for the French plane or the American plane? Let me tell you a story. Do we like stories? In the 1980s, the Australians purchased a bunch of FA-18 fighter planes from the Americans. Yeah. Now, this FA-18 fighter plane, it has software. It has a target acquisition system. It has a IFF thing, if friend or foe, and it has a target acquisition system, which is the radar and the software behind it and all that. So when the Australians acquired, when the fighter planes were delivered and the Australians tried them out and all that, they discovered something interesting. When they flew the FA-18 Super Hornets, and they said that I want the target acquisition system to, let's say in mock combat practice or whatever, I want the target acquisition system to lock on to so and so target. When they did that, the target acquisition system refused to lock on to those targets. Essentially, what happened is that the software inside the plane refused to lock onto targets that the Americans did not designate as targets. Let's say the Australians wanted, for whatever reason, to designate a Chinese aircraft as a target, or maybe let's say an Indonesian aircraft for argument's sake, or some other aircraft, maybe a New Zealand aircraft. The target acquisition system would not allow the plane to do that. It would not lock onto those targets. So these planes came essentially crippled. And the Australians were allowed to use these planes only for purposes that the Americans would whitelist. Everything else, no, you can't do it. So what's the point of buying such planes? It is they bought these planes, I think, in the 1980s, 85, 86, 87, somewhere there. It's only in 2006 or 2007 that they were able to circumvent the code and put in their own software package. 20 years it took them for being able to use the planes properly for whatever purpose they wanted. Does India want to be in that position? You acquire a bunch of American hardware, a bunch of American planes, and then you can't use them for what you need to use them for. It's like the Kargil war situation. The Indian Army was using the GPS system, which belongs to the Americans. And when the war happened, the Americans switched off the GPS system for the Indian Army. So suddenly we were not able to target things effectively. When you use foreign technology, it always comes with a kill switch. They can kill it anytime they want. They can disable it remotely anytime they want. So that we have used Russian technology for a very long time, fighter planes and all. We have never run into the situation. The Russians have never done this to India. I spoke about Russia as well yesterday. That Russia, India has no real friends. Yeah, you can look at that. But the Russians have never done that to India. This sort of blackmail. The Americans are known to do it to their closest allies, the Australians. Australia is a US corporation. Australia is owned by the Americans. Australia is one of the 5 I nations, the US and 5 vassals, the 5 English-speaking vassals. And the Australians were treated like this when they bought American fighter planes. You think India will not be treated the same way? It is dangerous to acquire any critical equipment from the Americans because they can disable it at a moment's notice when they feel like it. It is dangerous. Now, even the French possibly could do it, possibly, but the French seek a certain degree of freedom from their own vassal status. The French are the only nation in Europe, in the EU, in NATO, which has a certain amount of certain degree of independence in foreign policy. Not completely, but to a certain extent it does. Yeah, their nuclear weapons and nuclear missiles are not owned by the Americans and controlled by the Americans. They control it themselves, and certain other things as well. They have their own independent foreign policy in the Indian Ocean to a certain extent. So the French would very much like to break free of this slavery that has been imposed upon them by the English speaking world since the end of the Second World War. Yes. So I would say that the French deal would be, you know, more trustworthy than the American deal. So I would say that India should, when it comes to these two choices, the FA-18 or the Rafale, India should go with the Rafale. And I believe that's the direction in which we seem to be going. So my assessment is that we should go for the Rafale, not for the FA-18 or the MiG-29, because it's the MiG-29 is kind of an older fighter plane. We want something more modern. The Rafale is great. And obviously, India and France have a significant amount of strategic convergence, and we have been cooperating in a variety of ways, some which we know of, some which we may not know of, and so on. So I think India and France have a certain amount of understanding, certain degree of trust to some extent, much more than what India has with the US. So I think India should go for the Rafale rather than the FA-18. That is what I would say. Now it's for the government to decide, but I hope that's, based on what I know, it seems to be the best choice. Harshit says, what is your view? Should India invest in strategic bombers? Strategic bombers. What's a strategic bomber? A strategic bomber is a massive aircraft that can carry lots of very large quantities of payload, ammunition, weapons, systems, cruise missiles, gravity bombs, laser guided bombs, smart bombs, or whatever else. Ballistic missiles too can be launched from strategic bombers. So typically 30, 40, 50 tons of payload. And a strategic bomber has a very large range, typically 7, 8, 9, 10, 12,000 kilometers without refueling, typically. So certain strategic bombers would have a without refueling range of maybe 7,000 kilometers. Some may have a 10,000 kilometer range, and with refueling you can extend it even further, and so on. Yeah. Should India invest in strategic bombers? So to answer this, I should show you the map to understand, do we need to invest in strategic bombers? So India's zone of interest is the entire Indian Ocean region. And our number one threat is China. And when it comes to China, the heart of China is far to the east. Most of China is empty. Most of it is occupied territory, occupied from Tibet, from the Uyghurs, and so on. The real China is in the east. This is the true Han heartland. Beijing is in the far east of China. So is Chongqing, Shan, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Dongguan, Hong Kong, Chengdu, and so on. Yes. So the targets of interest for India, in case a big war breaks out between India and China, if we have to neutralize Chinese high value targets, these are all in the far east of India. Now you could launch ballistic missiles, but I am sure that the Chinese have certain ballistic missile defenses, and they would guard cities like Beijing, etc., very, very carefully. Yeah. So even if we have MIRV, MIRV equipped missiles, ballistic missiles with multiple independently targetable warheads and all, the Chinese may have defenses for that. But if you have a strategic bomber that can fly deep into Chinese territory undetected, and then launch cruise missiles like the BrahMos, for instance, which have a very high velocity, then it would be very hard for the Chinese to defend against that. So that's why, and even when it comes to safeguarding the Malacca Straits, for instance, or maybe blockading the Malacca Straits, you could have strategic bombers take off from maybe southern India or somewhere else, and then carry out operations in the Malacca Strait. Maybe we could even carry out peacekeeping operations throughout the Indian Ocean if you have strategic bombers. There are lots of zones of interest for India. So actually, I would say that strategic bombers make a lot of sense for India. Right now, all the bombing duties are carried out by multi-role fighters like the Sukhoi 30 MKI, the Jaguars, and so on, the Mirages, and so on and so forth. Even the MiG-21s and so on. Yeah. So it would be great for India to acquire a bunch of long range strategic bombers. Right now, all the air assets, the bombing assets we have are theater assets. We need strategic assets. A military theater is a smaller zone than a military a strategic area, so we need strategic bombers, and so that's why I think that India should invest in strategic bombers. And I would say that if you want to really study this in detail, there is this wonderful article that I can point you at. It is by Rakesh Krishnan Sinha. Is a wonderful geopolitical analyst. So this article, India's blackjack gamble: Does the IAF really need Russia's Tu Tupolev 160 strategic bombers? It's a great article. It explains everything in great detail. The case for why we should possibly acquire this, and how many of these we should acquire. So I've heard, it's in the news right now. It's kind of a rumor, or kind of possibly it may actually happen, that India may be in the process of acquiring 6 Tupolev 160 strategic bombers from Russia on lease, possibly. Yeah, 6 of these. 6 is a great number. So this is an enormous aircraft. It flies at Mach 2. And what's the range? I'm sure the range is. What's the range? Yeah, it can fly 20,000 kilometers non-stop with aerial refueling. It has a payload capacity of 40 tons. It's a Mach 2 bomber, and it can go essentially anywhere in the Indian Ocean region, in the South China Sea, and it can go all the way to Beijing and come back and deliver a wonderful payload. It can carry 12 heavy cruise missiles, BrahMos class cruise missiles. It could possibly carry a whole set of other armaments as well. So I think it makes a lot of sense for India to acquire this weapon system, this bomber. Yeah, because we have threats from China. The Chinese have their own H-20 deep strike bomber, the intercontinental deep strike bomber that they are on the verge of developing, and they also have a stealth Xi'an H-6K bomber that they are deploying and all that. So there are significant threats emanating out of China, and the Americans also have their strategic bombers and all that. So we also should acquire this one. The Russians have modernized this fighter plane, this strategic bomber. I think it makes a lot of sense for India to acquire this. India in the past 70 plus years of history has never had a strategic bomber, even though it made a lot of sense for India to have it. It's all because of India's strategic myopia. For the longest time, the Indian political class and the Indian military establishment also saw only China, only Pakistan as the major threat. They kind of neglected the real threat coming from China. It's only now that our horizons have properly broadened. So I think it makes a lot of sense to very quickly, soon, acquire 6 of these very powerful aircraft. The thing about this aircraft is that it can penetrate deep into enemy territory. It flies incredibly fast. It's a Mach 2 plane, twice the speed of sound. It has a terrain hugging radar, which means it can fly very low and just above the terrain, maybe 20, 30 feet above the terrain, possibly. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it can fly low, stay below the range of most radars. And even if it's detected by radar, it has countermeasures. It flies at Mach 2, so it's really hard to catch up with it. And that Mach 2 speed, coupled with the Mach 2 of the BrahMos, can deliver a huge amount of just kinetic energy and momentum, apart from whatever warhead the BrahMos will carry. So I think it makes a lot of sense. So I would say, if you want to know all the answers, read this article. Wonderful article, explains everything. Yeah. So I think it makes a lot of sense for India to invest in strategic bombers. Okay, RM says Russia sold fighter helicopters to Pakistan in 2015. Yeah, like I showed yesterday. Yes. So why can't India sell weapons to Ukraine? Why should we sell weapons to Ukraine? The Ukrainians have this major benefactor, the superpower. The Americans are pouring in arms and ammunition and weapon systems into Ukraine for free. Yes. All they ask is that the Ukrainians fight to the last soldier. Yeah. Fight the proxy war for NATO. Let your soldiers die. We will give you all the weapons you need, all the obsolete weaponry that we can provide you from NATO, from the European nations, maybe even from the America, from the US itself. So if the Ukrainians are getting so much of this, why would they seek arms, ammunition, weapons, etc. from India. And the truth is that Ukraine is a hostile nation. Ukraine has never been friendly to India. Ukraine has always been anti-India. Ukraine has itself. Ukraine sold tanks to Pakistan. Ukraine has always voted against India in the United Nations and in favor of Pakistan. India still had certain military dealings with Ukraine. Would you like to see what was going on? Let me show you. Here is an article from Russia Beyond by the same author, Rakesh Krishnan Sinha. Yes, wonderful geopolitical analysis. So, fake MiGs, missing Antonovs, why India must keep away from Ukraine. So, the Ukrainians sold fake MiGs to the Croatians, defective MiGs. And look at this. How can you lose an aircraft? Well, you can if you are a Ukrainian company. A major crisis involving Ukraine erupted in April 2015 when the Ukrainians, believe it or not, lost 5 Antonov 32 transport planes belonging to the Indian Air Force. These aircraft were part of a batch of 40 AN 32s that had been sent to Ukraine state owned, whatever this is, otehr export for upgrades and refurbishment. The remaining 64 were to upgraded to the IAF's Kanpur Air Force Base under a technology transfer from Ukraine, but the planned upgrade was halted as Ukrainian engineers walked out of the job and supplies of spare parts stopped. The IAF brass did not find it funny. They raised an almighty fuss and told the Ukrainians, find our planes. The Antonov 32s were ultimately found and flown back to India. So the Ukrainians tried to steal 5 Indian Air Force planes. Yes. A diplomat from the Ukrainian embassy told the Indian side that the IFS must resolve this issue with the company. The Ukrainian government cannot help. And the financial portal Zero Hedge comments, we wonder if that rather unhelpful attitude has anything to do with India not imposing sanctions on Pakistan. And like I said, the Ukrainians have been supplying tanks to Pakistan and all that. So I'm glad India is now staying far away from Ukraine. It's a hostile nation. We should stay away from it. And well, good luck to them for what's coming. Okay, next. Animesh says, what happens if a nuclear submarine sinks? Ooh. Are there any sunken nuclear submarines in our oceans? So first of all, let me tell you that submarines are way safer than aircraft. And how do we know this? Because there are way more aircraft in the ocean than there are submarines in the air. So submarines are safer than planes. Okay, I hope you understand. It's a joke. Now, what happens when if a nuclear submarine sinks? Well, if it sinks, it's dangerous. Are there any sunken nuclear subs in our oceans? Yes. Let's find out. So let's put Google search on the screen and let's take a look at it together. There was a Russian nuclear submarine called the K-278 Komsomolets. Yes. I got the spelling right. The Soviet submarine K-278 Komsomolets. It was a very advanced submarine, which sank in the Barents Sea off the coast of Norway in the late 1980s. And yeah, it was not only a nuclear powered submarine, which means it had a nuclear reactor with nuclear fuel inside. I believe it may also have had nuclear weapons on board. Did it have missiles? Had missiles, did it? It carried torpedoes and cruise missiles. Okay, I'm not sure if it was carrying nuclear missiles at the time, but it certainly had its nuclear reactor. So there was an accident on board and the thing sank. And I'm sure many of the crew perished. Yes, 42 total died. So that's one example. So when you have a sunken nuclear submarine with a nuclear reactor on board, it is a very dangerous thing. You have to, well, as long as the nuclear reactor itself is not breached, and if it is, then it's still okay. But even then, you have to keep on testing the waters in the region for any possible nuclear contamination. Any radiation that is leaking out of the thing. And if there is a radiation leak, you would have to take extraordinary measures to perhaps to perhaps salvage the submarine, or maybe to entomb it in some kind of casing and ensure that the nuclear fuel doesn't leak out, or possibly even salvage the nuclear reactor. It's very dangerous, very hazardous, and people will get exposed to nuclear radiation. But what can you do about it? So yes, when a nuclear submarine sinks, as long as the nuclear reactor isn't destroyed, or it isn't breached, the situation is still okay. In the long run, you would possibly want to take out the nuclear reactor in some manner, and take it out of the ocean. But if you can't do it, then you have to keep monitoring the entire region for any evidence of radiation leakage. And if the nuclear reactor itself breaks, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. If there is any leakage, any substantial leakage, it's a disaster. uh, Comparable with the 3 Mile Island disaster, or Chernobyl, or the Fukushima disaster. It's the same kind of thing. We don't want that to happen ever. But yes, there have been nuclear submarine accidents, like the one that I've put on the screen, the K278 Komsomolets. All right, let's take some more questions. Atharva says, how is Mohammed bin Salman so confident in going against the USA? Yes, he wants to join BRICS, which is essentially rebellion against the US. Isn't the absolute monarchy too fragile and volatile, and a coup is highly possible? How could he take such a big risk? By the way, I'm 17 years old. I'm currently pursuing bachelor's in Chinese studies. Characters are very difficult to learn, and all names in history sound the same. Haha. All the best in your studies, sir. And it's good that somebody is studying the Chinese language and stuff like that, culture, because we need our own experts vis-a-vis Chinese with understanding of China and all that. Yeah, so it's great to see that. Now, how is Mohammed bin Salman so confident in going against the US? There are two extreme possibilities. One possibility is that he is completely stupid. He's making a suicidal choice. The other possibility is that he has calculated all the possibilities very well, and he is very confident that he has complete control within his country, and he's confident that there is no possibility of a coup against him. See, in the Saudi royal family, there are lots of claimants to the throne. People who are first in line, second in line, third in line, 10th in line, that sort of thing, to the throne. There's always this line, the line of claimants to the throne. So typically it's the first in line who becomes the next king. So, and obviously, when you have such a situation, you will have, politics that's being played behind the scene. You will have people who are ambitious and who would like to see nothing more than the current king being replaced, and possibly me coming to power in his stead, that sort of thing. So it's always a dangerous situation, even in the best of times. So when Mohammed bin Salman came to power, if you recall, he had taken a significant number of his family members hostage in a hotel, in a five-star hotel, in a luxury hotel. And I think whatever was engineered at the time would have ensured that he has absolute power over the nation. Yes. So it looks like, I don't think he is a silly person or a stupid person. I think he's a very intelligent person, a very ambitious and determined person. And it looks like he has done all the calculations, and he has seen what the different threats to him are. And it looks like he has calculated that he is strong enough, powerful enough, and in control enough of his nation to go ahead and try this out. Try to go against the US and try to become a member of BRICS, go towards the India, China, Russia side instead of the US side, which is a huge, very risky thing. But looks like he has calculated that he's going to be able to succeed in that. So let's see how it goes. But it's obviously a very big risk that he has taken, for sure. Jaspreet Singh says, what's the difference between the term Indo-Aryans and Aryans? Because I've seen that these terms are used interchangeably. Also, how Aryans, Scythians, and Huns are different from each other. Do they have all their origins in India before moving out? Okay, good question. Let's take the second part of the question first. How do we do this? Aryans. This term Aryan, the Aryan term, or the Indo-Aryan term, it's a Western construct. This term was created by foreigners, by Westerners, Europeans. It's not an Indian term. Yeah. The actual term is Arya, Arya, Arya. That's what that's the term that was used in the Indo-Iranian world. If it is to be used as a self designation, it can only be used by the people of Indian origin or Persian origin. And the Persian people were also descendants of Indians, of ancient Indians. And that's why they also considered themselves to be Arya. The Indians always use the term Arya as an adjective that signifies superior behavior, yeah, noble behavior. So a person who would be called Arya would be a person who is highly cultured and civilized. It was not used in India as an ethnic or racial term. The Persians used it as an ethnic self designator, as a racial term, as an ethnic term, that we are the Arya people. So it no longer meant superior or cultured or civilized. It meant Persian, for the Persian people, for the descendants of the ancient Indians who moved to Persia. So the term in the Sanskrit language and in the old Iranian language, which is a daughter of the Sanskrit language, the term was Arya, Arya, not Aryan. And then the Europeans decided to mangle it up, to distort it, and they started using the term Aryan. So the term Aryan, from the European perspective, meant the entire Indo-European language family, people who spoke the Indo-European languages. These were all called the Aryan peoples. That's how they used this made up term. And then we know the story in the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century. The Germans, the Nazis, they misappropriated this term and used it to designate the Nordic people, the North European people. And that's how this term picked up. This term became associated with Nazism and racism and all that. And then it became difficult for the historians, the scholars in the West, to keep using the term, because for most people, the lay people, the term Aryan denoted Nazi, had very strong Nazi connotations. So then they decided to start using to add a prefix. So they added the prefix Indo to Aryan. And started calling it Indo-Aryan. So earlier they had created this artificial set of families, the language family called the Aryan languages, which are the languages that are spoken in northern western India and Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, not Bhutan, Nepal, and so on. Yeah. Now these languages are called Indo-Aryan languages. So these are all artificially made up terms. These are all Eurocentric, Western, Occidentalist terms. These are not terms that have emerged out of India or Persia, right? So there is no real difference between Indo-Aryans and Aryans. They just don't want to use the term Aryans anymore because it has Nazi connotations. That's why they now use the term Indo-Aryan. But the meaning is the same from their perspective. Yes? So there's no real difference. It's just that the term Aryan is now tainted. Even in the US, the white supremacist groups, they call themselves the Aryans or whatever the hell it is. Yeah. So it's a racist term, it's a white supremacist term, it's a Nazi term. That's what they have done to it. So now academics and scholars don't use it anymore. They use the term Indo-Aryan, but it has the same meaning. Yeah. So that's what it is. Now, how are the Aryan, Scythians, and Huns different from each other? So the Scythians. So if you are to consider the Aryan term as an ethnic designator, then if you were to use it in that manner, it denotes the people of India and Persia. So the term Aryan, if you want to use Aryans as an ethnic term, it means the people of India and Persia. The Scythians were descendants of ancient Indians. There were lots of migrations of Indians out of India. One of the first known migrations happened as in the aftermath of the Battle of the Ten Kings, in which a whole number of Rigvedic clans were evicted out of India because they lost the battle. Yeah, that's a whole different story. I will not go into that. So that's one of the first known examples or instances of Indians migrating out of India westwards and to the north of India. Yeah, and then you had these regions called Uttarakuru and Uttaramadra. Uttarakuru, let's put it on the screen. Uttarakuru. What was Uttarakuru? What was Uttaramadra? So Uttarakuru was north of the Himalayas and north of the Kuru Mahajanapada. So, which essentially means that Uttarakuru was Tibet and present-day Xinjiang, which is currently, for now, occupied by China. That was Uttarakuru. The entire vast expanse of land north of Nepal and Bhutan and Arunachal and all of that, north of Kashmir, north of Ladakh, that was Uttara Kuru. And present day Central Asia, which is Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all of that was Uttara Madra. At that time, Gandhara was a part of India, which is now called Afghanistan. So the Scythians, they lived in Uttara Kuru and Uttara Madra. They were a nomadic people. They were of Indian origin. Their kings described themselves as descended from Vedic kings, right? They performed the rituals such as the Ashwamedha Yagna and all that for some time, and then eventually their culture became mixed up with people from other parts of the world, from other Central Asian nomadic people. So eventually the Scythians became a kind of mixed race, yeah. But culturally they remained very much Indian. They were sun worshippers, even when they fought with the Persians and all that. So the Scythians are descendants of ancient Indians. So which means that if you were to call Indians as Aryans, then the Scythians were descended from ancient Aryans. The Huns were not so at all. The Huns originate north of present day China, in the region that's more or less roughly present day Mongolia. That's where the Huns originated about 2,500 years before today. The Chinese called these people the Xiongnu, Xiongnu, or something like that. That's the spelling in the Roman alphabet, the English alphabet. Yeah. So the Huns emerged from that region. They were warlike people. They forced the Kushans and then the Scythians to run westwards and southwards, and that's how the Scythian and Kushan invasion of India happened. The Huns were an Eastern Asian people. They looked very different from Indians. The typical Eastern Asian features, the so-called Mongoloid features, right? That's what the Huns originally had, and then they also ruled over large parts of Central Asia and even Eastern Europe, and they also acquired a mixed ethnicity. They mixed with the people of these regions, and eventually it all became a big melting pot. So the Huns have a different origin, a different ancestry. The Scythians are essentially descendants of ancient Indians, which means descendants of ancient Aryans, if you want to use the term Aryans for ancient Indians. So that is the story. Sudipta says, could you please explain how demonetization used to work in ancient times when a new ruler used to come and issue his own coins? What happened to the old coins in circulation? Very interesting question. It's nice to see a question like this. So listen, in the old days, coins were either silver or gold. Sometimes when times were bad, you would have alloys, which is like smaller coins, or coins with gold that mixed with some other metal, slightly cheapened form of the thing. But typically when you had the great emperors of India, whether it is the Gupta emperors or the Kushan emperors or the Mauryan emperors, or even later on, you would have typically gold coins, or later on silver coins. So the various Mahakshatrapas also had gold coins, and later on even silver coins. So now the value of the coins came from the precious metal, not from whatever was stamped on top of it. Yes. So we find lots of coins in archaeological sites. Sometimes you find pots that have been buried by people long ago and then forgotten for whatever reason, or they could not be retrieved, full of coins. You find that. Sometimes you find coins strewn around here and there, people losing coins from their pocket or whatever. So you find coins, lots of coins in archaeological sites. I'm not sure if we have found Mauryan era coins, but we certainly have lots of examples of Kushan era coins. Kanishka's coins, and coins of his later successors. You have Gupta era coins, which depict the Gupta emperors as really muscular, ripped guys, warlike guys, also playing musical instruments and all that. And you find coins of Mahakshatrapas like Nahapana, etc., all across the place. They found coins of Nahapana and Vasudeva, etc., in the British Islands, in the Roman world, in the Greek world, and so on. So the question is, when a new ruler is to come to power, what would happen to the old coins? The new ruler would need to issue new coins with his face on top of it, on the coins, right? So what happens? So what would happen? So typically, either one of two things would happen. They would either take all the coins back, possibly that's one possibility. We don't know. We don't have the records. So logically, one of two things could happen. One is you take all the old coins, you melt them up, and then you create new coins with the face of the new ruler on them. Or secondly, you just take the old coin, heat it up, and then uh, you know stamp it with the face of the new ruler. So you don't even have to melt it, you just have to put a new face on it. And sometimes you can see the outline of the old face also on it. So one of the examples I can give you they have found many coins of the great Mahakshatrapa of Nahapana that have been overstruck with the likeness um, of Gautamiputra Satakarni. Yeah. So Gautamiputra Satakarni most likely lived a couple of generations after Nahapana. Some historians say that Gautamiputra Satakarni must have defeated Nahapana, because that's when you do such a thing like superimposing your image on the image of the previous king. But most likely I think Gautamiputra Satakarni lived a couple of generations after Nahapana, and maybe he conquered territories that were at some point in time ruled by the Mahakshatrap Nahapana, and then he acquired those coins, and he embossed his own likeness, his own face on top of Nahapana's coins. So that's the kind of thing that happened. You typically never threw away old coins because they were valuable, they were precious metal, gold or silver. So you would either melt them and create new coins, or if you did not want to go through all the trouble, you would simply overstrike the coins with your own image, and then it would be used as your own coin. So that's the kind of process that would happen. Obviously, uh, India has a history that goes back thousands and thousands of years. Coins have been in use for at least 2,000 years minimum, most likely at least 2,500 years. I'm sure that it must have been in use even before that, because we had a Iron Age, Copper Age, Bronze Age, all of these things. So, yeah, that's how it would work. That's how demonetization would work in ancient times. Yeah. Tejas says, in ancient India, Bihar was one of the most prosperous places in India. Bihar was a place of ancient dynasties like Magadh, Mauryans, and so on. Bihar was a birthplace of Sita, Mithila, yes, Mithila. For thousands of years, Bihar has been the center of learning as well. We know that. So, why is Bihar in its current state? Why is it not doing so well in modern times? In the past, the whole of India was incredibly prosperous. Yes, we know that Bihar was a fantastically prosperous place. Magadh, after all, Patliputra was the ancient capital of India for the longest time. Yes, um, it was the capital of the Mauryan dynasty. Chandragupta Maurya, Ashok Maurya, Bimbisar, and later Samprati and all that. These kings. It was the capital of the Shunga dynasty, Pushyamitra Shunga and his descendants. It was the capital of the Gupta Empire, the Gupta dynasty, and so on. So it's been, in a way, one of the one of the most prosperous and most important parts of India. Many empires emerge out of there. Patliputra is one of the greatest cities of ancient India, and obviously a place of learning. We had great Vishwavidyalayas, universities like Nalanda and all that. Many more, I'm sure. So what happened to Bihar? What happened to Bihar is what happened to all of India. We had Takshashila far to the west of Magadh, all the way in Gandhar. Takshashila was a great university, great center of learning. The great Mauryan, um, what shall we call him? The great mentor of the Mauryan Emperor Chandragupta, who Vishnugupta Chanakya, who was from Magadh, he taught in Takshashila, in Gandhar. We know that. So India was interconnected. All of India was incredibly prosperous. Think of Gandhar itself. It was a place of learning. You have so many viharas and stupas there. And you had the great University of Takshashila, a lot of prosperity as well. Think of a place like Saurashtra. Saurashtra was the gateway to the west for India. During the time of the great Mahakshatrapa rulers, the Indo-Scythian rulers, Saurashtra was incredibly prosperous because we had the great ports in Saurashtra through which trade with Egypt and the Greek world and the Roman world would be carried out. And that's why that's why the Gupta emperors decided to take over Saurashtra from the Indo-Scythians, from the Mahakshatrapas. Think of Kalinga. Kalinga was incredibly prosperous and a great center of arts and culture and learning. Think of Sri Lanka. It was called Golden Lanka. What happened to all these places? Everything was destroyed by the invaders and occupiers. Firstly by the Turks, and then by the Europeans. And everything of value was stolen out, plundered out of the Indian subcontinent. That's why all these. And think of Bengal, Vangadesh. Bengal was possibly, the British described Bengal as the most prosperous province of India. Obviously, they saw it from their perspective. But Bengal was indeed incredibly prosperous. Yes, and it was a great place of learning and culture. And look at Bengal today. Whether you talk about East Bengal or West Bengal, look what's happened there. Is there any prosperity? So what happened? First of all, you had 1,000 years of foreign occupation, which destroyed prosperity all across India. All of India was incredibly prosperous. One third minimum of the entire global GDP came from India. India accounted for at least a third of the entire world's GDP, if not more. Most likely, it would have accounted for more than half of the entire world's GDP if you go back 2,500 years, because there was nothing else in the world apart from small places like Egypt. Egypt was minuscule compared to India. Rome was insignificant compared to India from the terms of GDP. Look up Angus Madison's research. Don't trust me. Yep. So what happened is the Europeans destroyed India. The Turks destroyed India, and what was left was destroyed by the Europeans. India became, we know what happened. Yes, completely destitute. Famines, hundreds of artificially engineered famines, and so on. So that's why things are like this. And then after independence, so-called independence, we had the Nehruvian era, and then we had various state governments. I'm not taking anybody's name. Yeah, I'm in various parts of India who were not interested in progress, in development, and so on. So that's what happened to various parts of India, including Bihar. Very sad, and it's time that we get our act together. I mean, Bihar is one of the greatest parts of India. Today, unfortunately, in some parts of India, people make fun of Indians who come from UP and Bihar. That is horrible. UP has been the ancient heartland of India. Kashi is the epicenter of Indian civilization for thousands of years, for more than 10,000 years. And Bihar, Magadh, is one of the great power centers of India and a great place of learning and culture and advancement. We would like to see Uttar Pradesh and Bihar regain their great glory, which they always had. So it's time we start doing that, Um, Arnav Carpenter says, how can we say that the famines during the British rule were engineered by the British? Because there were many famines before British arrival which killed millions. How are those famines different from the ones during British rule? What data do you have to claim that there were many famines before the British arrived? If you look at historians, of the writings of historians like R.C. Majumdar and others, you will find that before the British arrived in India, in the past 2,000 years before the British arrived in India, there were three major famines. Three. Of course, there were periods of drought caused by the El Nino phenomenon and all that. And yet, India never had famines. There were a couple of famines during the Mughal rule, the Turkic rule, because of mismanagement and all that. But why? But before before the millennium of humiliation, India almost never ever had famines. Show me the record, right? You making a claim without any evidence. I invite you to show me the evidence of famines that killed millions of Indians before the millennium of humiliation. Show me evidence. Yes, the burden of proof lies on the person who makes the claim. I am telling you there were no such famines. Maybe one or two, maybe three in 2,000 years. Now, and how is it that there were no famines despite the El Nino phenomenon? Despite sometimes you have this periodic bouts of drought. Why were there no famines? Because Indians knew how to manage food grains. Let me give you an example. Here we are. This is a tweet of mine. Okay, Saraswati civilization grain silos from 7,380 belief. 7,380 BC. Look at the size of these grain silos. See, you can see a human being squatting next to it. These are incredibly large grain silos. I think it's from Rakigari or Kalibangan or something. Yeah. These silos have been dated through carbon dating of organic trace materials to 7,380 BC. And these are enormous grain silos. You can store grain that will last you for several years. So even 9,500 years before today, Indians knew how to safeguard their grain. They were cultivating grain in large quantities, and they would have enough grain in storage that could safely keep people well fed for several years. So Indian rulers and Indian society always had this. It was impossible to have a famine in India. That's how well managed the entire system used to be, even 9,000 years before today. So in a society such as that, if a famine happens, it can only happen if it is artificially engineered. And it's only after the British came to India that suddenly famine started happening every single year in every part, in various parts of India. Famine after famine after famine. If you add up the total of the death toll of these famines, you will reach a figure close to 100 million Indians who died in these artificial famines. So please educate yourselves. Let me not say, it really annoys me to see these questions, but I understand why it is so. So it's because our education system hasn't given us the right perspective. It has not given us the facts. Yeah. Has those of you who are watching, have your history textbooks taught you that we had proper famine management systems for thousands of years? That even during the Saraswati Sindhu era, we had these systems in which you had these massive grain silos that could store grain, that could feed people for several years, not just 1 year, but several years. We had these systems in place. It was impossible to have famines in India. It's only when the British arrived and they saw that the Indians fight so well, and then they refused to give up. So they decided that the best way to defeat the Indians is to starve them. If you are hungry, if you're starving, how will you fight? That's what they did. So please, I beg you, educate yourselves and stop having this inferiority complex and stop blaming yourselves. You are the victims. Blame the oppressor, not the victim. Saurabh. Two questions by Saurabh. What was the history of human sacrifice? Is it present in ancient India also? Did Native Americans do human sacrifice on a very large scale? Historians always say this, but I want some hard evidence to support this narrative. There is no evidence of human sacrifice in India. Some random accounts here and there, you will always find some criminals doing something criminal in a society which is the world's largest society, the world's largest geographical area of one civilization. You will always there's always some criminal elements in society. You can't portray that as ritualized human sacrifice if they murder somebody. Yeah. So what's the history of human sacrifice? There have been lots of cultures that have practiced human sacrifice, but much of it is propaganda. For instance, when Julius Caesar conquered the British Isles, he first of all conquered Western Europe, from the Celtic people. Then he conquered the British Isles too. And he wrote this wonderful account in Latin, which is nowadays used as a textbook for learning Latin. So he wrote about the Celtic people, the Gaulish people and all, Gaulish people. And he said that these people, they practice the barbaric human sacrifices, the vicar man. They put the victims in this huge this vicar statue of a human being, and then they burned them alive. There is no evidence that this actually happened, but that's what Julius Caesar wrote. Maybe it was done to justify his conquest of these people and to portray them as inferior, barbaric people. So it is all right to conquer such people and maybe massacre a few million of them. Yeah. So human sacrifice definitely has existed. Much of it may be propaganda, but in some places you obviously have human sacrifice. But the funny thing is that for instance, in Europe, in the Middle Ages, the medieval era, the most popular book in Europe at that time, in the Middle Ages, was the Malleus Maleficarum. Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of the witches. It was a manual on how to accuse somebody, a woman, of being a witch, how to identify the identifying characteristics, and how to torture her to death. And hundreds of thousands of European women were accused of being witches, and they were either burned alive or tortured to death. Is this not state-sponsored, religiously ordained human sacrifice? So human sacrifice was very much prevalent in Christian Europe. And the manual was the Malleus Maleficarum, the most popular book in Europe during the Middle Ages. Imagine that. Yeah. So that is human sacrifice. So when something like this happens in the West, they portray it as something else. But when so in some cultures you have war and you have execution. You take prisoners, and sometimes prisoners are executed. Yes. Let me, if I can find it. One second. Manacled. Let me shackled skeletons. Let me show you an image. You may be disturbed, so in case you are disturbed, please don't look. But yeah, it's an image of skeletons. All right, it's from Greece. Would you consider this to be human sacrifice? This is about 2,000 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Something like that. So over here it says that the shackled skeletons unearthed in Greece could be remains of slaughtered rebels. So in this case, this is not a human sacrifice, even though they have clearly been all shackled together and slaughtered. It's not human sacrifice. It is just execution of rebels. Yeah, it's a mass grave. Look at the horror of this scene. So when it's done in Europe, it's not a human sacrifice or something. But when it's done in Asia, perhaps, or among the North American people, the Native Americans, then they would classify that as evidence of a backward, primitive, barbaric, brutal culture that sacrificed human beings. It's very likely that you had wars. People were taken, soldiers were taken prisoner in war, and then they were executed. Do you remember what happened in Chittorgarh? Akbar the Great besieged Chittor. Eventually, the women committed Johar. They had to commit Johar because they did not want to be captured alive or dead by the Turks. The men went out and did their saka, and they fought to the last man. They all died. And then the defenseless population of the city, 30,000 non-combatants, unarmed civilians, men, women, children, 30,000 men, women, children were executed in one day. Is that human sacrifice? What exactly? How would you characterize that? So it's certainly possible that the North Americans, the Native Americans, they would have had conflicts between various clans and tribes and all that. And sometimes they would capture some people and then maybe they would be executed or whatever. Would you characterize that as the outcome of warfare, or would you characterize that as human sacrifice? So in many cases, when non-Europeans are involved, many of these cases of warfare, of execution, have been labeled incorrectly, with prejudice, deliberately, as human sacrifice. Yeah. So human sacrifice, obviously, when you execute somebody, that's, I mean, a sacrifice is typically when you are doing it for some god or something. I'm not sure how prevalent that was in the ancient world. I think lots of the so-called cases of human sacrifice may actually be executions of criminals, possibly, or rebels, or soldiers captured from the enemy, or whatever. Yeah. And in some cases there may actually be human sacrifice. So it's a mixed bag. I think executions and all that would have existed as long as the human species has existed. Yeah. But the claim that Native Americans did human sacrifice at a very large scale is absolute lies. Absolute lies. Not true at all. I would say that Native Americans were more civilized than the Europeans who destroyed them. All right. And in India, there is no history of human sacrifice, none whatsoever, until the Turks and the Christians, the Europeans, came in. Then it all happened. Because we had, at the hands of the Christians, the Portuguese, you had the Goa Inquisition, the barbaric, inhuman brutalities that they perpetrated on innocent Indians, men, women, children, in the name of their religion. Yeah, that is human sacrifice. Yes. So the foreigners, the Turks and the Europeans, have indeed perpetrated such atrocities in India on Indians. But Indians, what does Indian culture tell you? Whether the dharmic culture, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, etc., it says ahimsa paramo dharma. Non-violence is the highest ideal. Yes. So yes, violence unfortunately has to be resorted to in self-defense or for righteous causes, but non-violence is the greatest ideal. That's what we say. That's what our culture has always believed in. And there is no concept of sacrificing a life to a god. Sometimes, yeah, in some cases, certain rituals have emerged where you sacrifice certain animals to god and all. And yes, when times were bad, there were certain Kul Devis, goddesses, who would demand human sacrifice of your enemies in order to appease her. So certain Rajput clans had certain Kula Devis like Chamunda or Kali, and to appease, to please your Kula Devi, you would have to offer her human heads, but not innocent human heads. Not innocent human heads. the heads of the evildoers. You if you killed an innocent person and offered that person's head to the goddess, that would not give you any benefit. She would not be pleased with that, according to the belief, right? She wanted the heads of evildoers, of the enemies of the people. So yeah, so I would not consider that to be, well, truly human sacrifice, or in an evil sense. Yeah, it's like getting rid of the barbarians who have invaded your society and who want to destroy your culture and your people. So yeah, that's the deal. So India overall does not have any real history of human sacrifice. No history of sacrificing innocents or killing innocents, not at all. But in other parts of the world, yes. In Europe you had that, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's a whole, so it's a very big topic. You could have a month long seminar, program of seminars, and discuss this in very great detail. So many more questions that I have, but I will not be able to take them. Let me take some questions now from the live chat. As always, I am not able to take all the questions I've selected. So let me take some questions from the live chat. If you have questions from live chat, do ask me. All right. Archaeologists are trying their best to claim that a teenage girl excavated in Peru was a human sacrifice. Yeah, that's the mainstream general consensus, that girl who was discovered in Peru, she was essentially mummified because of the cold and the dry weather. They say that she was given some kind of hallucinogen, some kind of drug to consume, and then she was strangled and left on a mountaintop or something. Yeah, that's what they do claim. What else? Akshit Kumar Yadav says, why not Russian fighter planes? Well, get the best possible fighter plane you have, right? So if you want 36 fighter planes to take off from your aircraft carrier, let's consider the options. We have the MiG-29, which is an older, like a most likely third generation fighter plane, second or third generation fighter plane from Russia. It can take off and land from an aircraft carrier deck. The newer ones, like the Sukhois, etc., are too large. They can't take off or land from aircraft carrier decks. Uh, they are not suitable for the role. Is there any other Russian fighter plane that fits the bill? Not quite so. So the only candidate is the MiG-29. The competition for the MiG-29 is, let's say, the FA-18, the American Super Hornet, and the Rafale. If you consider all these planes, all the three, the most modern one is the Rafale. It's a 4.5 generation fighter plane, very advanced fighter plane, far better than the FA-18 and far better than the MiG-29. So why not go for the best one? We have the money. We have the money. So why not get the best possible bang for your buck? So that's why. That's what I'm saying. I have nothing against Russia or their fighter planes. Their fighter planes do well. The MiG-29s are good planes, but they're not the best, and we can afford the best. So that's the reason why I said not that. All right. What else do we have? Do we have anything interesting? Indian fashion history. I wonder why our historians don't write about this, don't research this. If you look at various Indian sculptures all across the length and the breadth of the Indian subcontinent from various time periods, let's say the Kushan period, the Gupta period, the Mahakshatrapa period, the Indo-Scythian period, the Chola period, the Chola dynasty, the Chera period, the Vijayanagar Empire. We have so many sculptures on the walls of temples. Most of them are still found in the south. The northern ones are all gone, destroyed by barbarians. Yes, but we still find lots of evidence. And we find these cave paintings of Indian men and women, ladies and gentlemen, wearing various kinds of designer outfits, you could say. Such incredible fashions we had, and not a single goddamn Indian historian has bothered to catalog this and write about this. It's so disappointing that our historians are good for nothing losers, and they are abdicating the duty, and they're wasting our money and our time writing anti-national garbage. So yeah, we have a very ancient history of fashion, It's something that, I mean, I would have to put lots of images on the screen and speak about them, but yes, it's something that I would invite you all to look at. Just look at ancient images of cave paintings from Ajanta, Ellora, other places. Yes, look at various sculptures we had on the walls of temples and other monuments. We get incredible examples of ancient fashion, very stylish, especially the fashion that ladies used, the kind of hairstyles they had, the kind of dresses they wore, various styles of saris, the kind of ornaments and jewelry they wore. And in the cave paintings, you see the kind of bright colors they used to have, and the fact that dark skin was considered to be beautiful. Incredible. There is so much to explore. India is like a gold mine for historians, sociologists, and so on, but they refuse to do that. So I hope some of you will go on to do that in the future. Let's take one more question, because we are almost at the end of today's episode. Let's see. Yes, they had sandals, they had sling bags, they had high platform sandals, kind of things. Those people who are slightly shorter, they wear this thick soles and all. So that sort of thing, and sling bags. They had mirrors, and they very interesting fashion we had. Various kinds of dresses they used to wear. My prediction for India in 2023: India wins, India rises, India keeps rising, India keeps progressing, India keeps doing well, and we'll get stronger. That's my prediction for India in 2023. I guess that's about it. Yeah, I think that's it for today. Yeah. So thank you so much for all the questions. It's always fun. Maybe we should have one session that is simply live chat, questions that are take only from the live chat. That would be interesting. That would be like it would perhaps give you uh, more options of asking questions. Yeah, more opportunities. So maybe I'll do that next week, possibly. I think the World Cup final is on Sunday, the next Sunday, 1 week from now. Maybe I could do a live stream in which I take questions from the live chat while commentating on what's happening in the World Cup. Maybe I'll think about that. Maybe. Yeah? So let's do something like that soon. Until then, take care. Thank you so much, as always, for all the questions, for your participation, for your support, for your viewership. Thank you so much. Very grateful. Always very grateful. Until next time, take care, and I will see you very soon. Thank you. Bye. Good night. Good day. Take care.